Now, if you think I'm just blowing smoke at you on this, is that I'm not. And what we are now dealing with here is what is called Rabbinic Chronology. And yes, there's a 166-year difference between the two. But how do they possibly think there's somehow 166 years less in the timeline? I mean, you have every ancient historian, chronographer putting it in the early 6th century BC, not the late 5th. And what about the archaeological evidence? King's List from the ancient Near East and all the astronomical dating of major events. Do the rabbis really think the entire scholarly world is off by 166 years? Yep. But maybe you don't believe me, so here you go. Rabbi Kravitz for JewsForJudaism.org wrote, "These are the 70 years for the first exile, 52 years under Cyrus, and 18 additional years to dedicate the Second Temple, and 420 years of the Second Temple." So you see, the 490 altogether with 70-year exile, plus, more important, him saying that the Second Temple period was only 420 years. He goes on saying, although there appears to be a discrepancy in chronology between the Jewish and secular Gregorian calendars of 166 years, with the secular dates earlier, is that it's clear that the Jewish record keeping is more reliable and consistent concerning these events. And here comes the justification. Because Babylonian calendars changed arbitrarily with every new Babylonian king, and limited archaeological discoveries often reflect their arbitrary chronology. Rabbi Skobik for Jews for Judaism Canada agreed with this chronology in his survival seminar that can be watched online. His Daniel 9 video is 2 hours long, and you have to go to the end at the 148 mark to hear him say that the Second Temple stood for 420 years. Rabbi Singer's discussion on the 70 weeks can be found on his audio series of Let's Get Biblical on the show Tanakh Talk on YouTube. And if you dig enough, you can find a fully developed chart of his, and on the bottom left-hand side of that you can see him stating that the Second Temple stood for only 420 years. And you see the same from Rabbi Rosenfeld on Aish.com saying that the Second Temple stood for 420 years. Now, with Rabbinic Chronology being the basis for their 70-week system, is that following their chronological thinking can get really challenging because during their presentations, they'll bounce between Rabbinic and Gregorian dates. And a piece to that is that they'll typically refer to key events in terms of years from creation, not the normative BC AD dates. To help ourselves here is that the 3338 Rabbinic date is equivalent to 421 BC. So we'll add it on our chart because maybe an Orthodox Jew is watching this right now and thinks in those terms of creation dates instead. Either way, both sets of dates will be presented to help both groups track along. Now, I'm sure you got a lot of questions floating around in your head on all of this, but probably the most curious one is, where in their timeline did they gut out 166 years? Because that's a pretty big compression, and the corresponding Gentile empires' time frames would then have to be adjusted somewhere or in places as well. The Babylonian Empire rule is recognized as 70 years between 3319 and 3389, with the temple being destroyed in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar from Jeremiah 52:12, which Rabbi Skobik even makes reference to Jeremiah 25's 70-year prophecy, which we'll discuss much more later on. So, under Rabbinic Chronology, Babylon's 70-year period has to be brought forward, squeezing down the Persian period substantially, with the Second Temple being finished in Persia's 18th year of rule over Judea. Now, how they fill in the remaining 420 years comes from two primary rabbinic sources. The first is from the Talmud. In Avodah Zarah 9a, it says that Persia continued to rule for 34 years after the Second Temple was built. Then the Greeks ruled for 180 years, then the Hasmoneans for 103 years, then the Herods for 103 years as well. And finishes saying that from this point on comes after the Second Temple's destruction. So, the four numbers added together is 420.
That doesn't look right, doesn't come out right.
That's right, Artie.
Billy?
You gotta carry the one right here.
So, these four periods make up the Second Temple period in the rabbinic view. So, what happens on the bottom of the chart is that Alexander's conquest is dated roughly 16 years later, or 13 years later, from 32 or 30 BC. But I think the most shocking piece to all of this is that the rabbis have made the whole Persian period lasting only 52 years. Where the Talmudist writer is likely getting this from is the Seder Olam Rabbah, the Great Order of the World. Finished around 160 AD, likely by Rabbi Halafta, is that it covers history from creation to the Bar Kokhba revolt. You can see that the last three chapters are relevant to our discussion. How we know that the Talmudist writer is very, very likely getting his info from Halafta is that he referred to him just before in 9a in 8b that he was his source. And you can find other examples in the Talmud where he is mentioned as the Seder author as well. At the end of chapter 28 in the Seder, it refers to Yoshi discussing the 70 weeks and that it lasted from the destruction of the first temple to the destruction of the second temple, with 70 years for the exile period and 420 for the second temple period. The Seder goes on in chapter 29 saying that Israel spent 52 years under the rule of the Babylonians after the first temple's destruction. The whole 70-year period is composed when you factor in Jeremiah 52 saying that it was in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, meaning that 18 total years have elapsed, plus the 52 left over makes 70. Please take note that the Seder references Jeremiah 29:10 and Daniel 9:2 as the exile period by saying, then they went up. It's an important piece to the modern rabbinic system. Then, the Seder describes that after 18 Persian years, the temple was rebuilt, which makes 70 total from the destruction. Then talks about how Ezra came up 5 years later in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. Then chapter 30 opens up describing Nehemiah's time to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, with the statement that the period of the Medes and Persians was 52 years. Just remember, we're working with Google Translate here, so if it looks kind of it's the best we're going to get right now. Then references Rabbi Halafta with the Greeks ruling 180 years and both the Hasmoneans and Herods ruling for 103 years apiece. Now, moving ahead by nearly 1,000 years is that we come to one of if not the most, revered commentators in rabbinic history with Rashi. He, too, followed the same viewpoint that the 70 weeks started with the destruction of the first temple to the destruction of the second, and remarked the same combination of 70 and 420 years that makes the whole set of weeks. Following soon after him is Abraham ibn Ezra. Sorry about that. His verse 24 commentary spoke about how the 70 weeks were 490 years, concluding with the second temple's destruction. Also composing around this time was Maimonides, aka Rambam. He also goes with the rabbinic timeline of 410 years for the first temple, with 70 years of exile plus 420 years for the second temple, thus 490. About 100 years later, Nachmanides, aka Ramban, debated Dominican friar Pablo Cristiani, a convert from Judaism to Christianity. An interesting thing is that Pablo argued for Jesus being the Messiah while using the rabbinic timeline, which Nachmanides agreed that is the one that he follows as well. And the beat goes on all the way to the present day with Rabbinic Chronology still ultimately using the Seder Olam chronology that was produced in the mid-2nd century AD. Reminder, hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, leave a comment, and don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. But in the meantime, stay salty.